Begin the current Daf, Mesech Nazir Daf Yud. We begin on second line down from the top of the Amid, where we continue to look at the next Mishnah, which essentially is the same machlokes as we had in the previous Mishnah, which opened up this parak, which we had on Daf Tes. Someone says I'm a Nazir from Gregors and from Develu. We had a machlokes Besham Beis Hill if he's going to be a Nazir or not, and we had a machlokes in that machlokes. What is their machlokes? Is it regarding becoming a Nazir, or like if Yehuda says, are they going to become a Neder from Gregors and Develu? So our Mishnah, which is actually just a lot of the daf, is complexities in trying to decipher the case conceptualization that we're talking about. But essentially, it's the same type of machlokes when you take a Neder. You're saying I'm a Nazir from the meat of the animal. Is it like the same as the previous Mishnah? It says I'm a Nazir from Gregors and Develu. It corresponds to Bekazach and Necheskel. Turn to Metafachim. I'm joining for today's daf. Something to discuss in today's daf are machlokes Besham Beis Hill, as we had in the previous daf, regarding a following case. Someone says that Omer Parazu, he's saying what the cow is saying. The cow is saying, Harein Nazira, I am going to be Nazira, Imoy Medes Ani, if I, the cow, gets up. So, like we said, there's a machlokes Tanakam Rabbi Yehuda, how to qualify the machlokes, as we had in the previous Mishnah, opening up the second parak. Tanakama says the machlokes is the person going to be a Nazir? Because they don't disagree that it's not a neder from the para. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda holds, no, the machlokes is if it's going to be a neder from the para. They don't disagree that you're not going to be a Nazir. Same as we had in the previous daf. Then in the Gemara has two explanations of what is the Mishnah's case. Rama Bachama says, as we'll see in the Gemara, that he's saying that the cow thinks, I'm not going to get up. So the Balabayis is saying, Hareini Nazar mibisara, I'm a Nazar from its meat, im omdo me'eles. There's a lot of nuances in the Gemara, so we're going to get stuck in the technicalities, so you just want to get the case before we speak about it, so when you get like a more of a global look at it. So yeah, the cow thinks he's not going to get up. I'm a Nazar if it gets up by itself, whereas Rava qualifies the case. For example, if a cow was laying down in front of him, and he says, I'm a Nazar from its meat, im loy omda, if it doesn't get up. And again, that's the case, and we'll see what's the machlokes Besham Beis Hill in such a case, if that's going to be like, again, like the Tanakama, like a Nazir, or like a Yehuda, like that of a Neder. So begin the current Daf Yud. Second line down at the top of the Amid, the second Mishnah of this parak. Omar, if someone says as follows, and again, it's one of those things you mamash just have to like hot cup to see, because it's very technical. Omar Parazu, this cow is saying, Hareini Nazira, cow. This guy is saying that the cow is saying that I'm a Nazira, Imoy Medes Ani, if I'm going to get stood up. Or let's say, this door says, Hareini Nazira, I'm a Nazir, im niftach ani, if I'm going to get opened. So we have machlokes Beishamai and Beis Hill. Beishamai Oimrim Nazir, the person becomes a Nazir. Beis Hill Oimrim Ein Nazir says he does not become a Nazir. On that, Rabbi Yehuda, again, just like we had in the previous Mishnah on Daf Tes, he says, no. Av k'shama Beishamai, even when Beishamai says that you're going to be liable. And the Gemara says, Loi amru ela ba'omer, it's only when the guy says, Hare parazu alai karban ima medesi. This cow is going to be on me as a karban if it gets up, meaning to say, you're not becoming a Nazir, you're going to be chayiv for the neder of the meat of the animal as a neder. Same thing as the previous Mishnah. Previous Mishnah we spoke about, Hareini Nazir min ha-Gregris min ha-Dvelo. We had a machlokes Besham Beis Hill, are you going to be chayiv or not? Tanakama says that the chiv is going to be Naziris. Yehuda says, no, they're not going to be chiv in Naziris. You can be chayiv as a neder from Gregris and Dvelo. That's the same thing Rabbi Yehuda is saying over here. Tanakama is saying, oh, machlokes Besham Beis Hill is you're going to be a Nazir. And Rabbi Yehuda is saying, no, machlokes if you're going to have a neder from the basa of the carbon, a basa of the meat like a carbon. Okay. Fragt die Gemara. Para mika mishtoya? Does a cow talk? What is going on over here? What is he saying? So Amar Bachame says, this is what it's talking about. Again, really this is all going to be about just really deciphering what the case is in very technical terms. So he says, what we're talking about over here is there was a cow that was squatting in front of him. Now, how do we know that the cow is squatting? How does Rambam know this? So like Taisa explains, because the words are imamed desani, if I'm going to get up. So obviously it's squatting. Now, Taisa goes through, according to the interpretation of Rambam Chama, what the Mishnah is saying. So we're going to read it word by word of the Gemara to see how this fits into the words of the Mishnah. So there was a cow squatting in front of him. Va'amar, in other words, the person who sees the cow squatting says, Kisrura parazu, this cow thinks. In other words, this cow is thinking to itself by the virtue of the fact that it's squatting, and mistama, we could presume that this is what it's thinking, that eino emedes, I can't get up. Now, obviously, says Taisus, it's not that the cow is actually thinking this. Maybe the far side, you have like some thought bubbles and the cow is thinking, hey, I can't do this. No, it doesn't have intelligence to think having such thoughts. Rather, says Taisus, what it means to say is, people who are passing by and see it squatting with such force, they're thinking this. And very important psychological principle called projection, since the one who sees the cow, he thinks this about the cow, he makes it as if the cow is thinking it itself. He brings a pasuk in Yomei, the ship thought it's going to break. Now, the ship is not thinking it's going to break. The person who sees the ship, he thinks it's going to break, so he makes it as if the ship thinks it's going to break. Very important psychological principle, how we project onto things as if it is thinking that. Okay, but that's the same thing over here in this story. That this guy is saying, oh, the cow is thinking, I'm not going to get up. No, the cow's not thinking, you're thinking about that. But anyway, that's the setup. Now, says the person, Hareini Nazir mibisara im amda me'alau. I'm going to be a Nazir from its meat if it gets up by itself. So this Hareini that I'm going to be is going on the person that is accepting upon himself the Naziris. That's why, actually, says Taisus, Hareini Nazira has to be with a mapik hey. Here we go again with the diktuk, right? It's with a mapik hey. Nazira. What does it mean? When we read the Mishnah, Hareini Nazira, we learned it, again, it's a very technical daf. We learned it as the cow, who's female, is saying, Hareini Nazira without a mapik hey. I am a Nazir. It's the feminine of I'm a Nazir. Says Taisus, Rami Bachama is saying that you read Nazira with a mapikeh. Nazir, how do you say Nazira with a mapikeh? However you say it. But you say it in a way that it means to say, I'm a Nazir from its flesh. Nazira means Nazir Shalah. That's what a mapikeh. Yeah. If it stands up. Okay, that's the basic setup. Now, Taisa points out, which is going to be important, because the next man, the Amma, is going to disagree on him for the following reason. Rami Bacham is adding on to the words of the Mishnah. What were the words in the Mishnah? The words of the Mishnah were, Imoimedes ani. Again, you have to really follow with like a tooth, like a comb here, because we're reading the words differently. We're interlacing different words here. We said Hareini Nazir is with a mapikeh. It's the guy talking about the flesh, not the cow talking about itself. He adds in the words, Imamedes me'eleha. That's what Rami Bacham is adding on. Because the words me'eleha are not from the words of the Mishnah. Nothing did it say anything about getting up by itself. But that's what he's adding on. Now, so Rami Bacham, let's just finish how he says it. So this is the machlekes. V'holchu b'shamei l'shitasen, u'b'sil l'shitasen. This is their opinion we know from the previous daf. The Mishnah had said, b'shamei, the army that they said in the previous Mishnah, Mina Gregors and Mina Devela. Have a Nazir, that you're going to be a Nazir. So, just like there's no application of Gregors to Naziris, even so you're going to be a Nazir. So, Chanami here also, that it doesn't really apply Basar for Nazir, but Kiyama Mebisara, when you say from its flesh, so have a Nazir, you're going to be a Nazir. But Basila say, no, loy have a Nazir, you're not going to be as a Nazir. Whereas according to Yehuda, he would say the same thing as in the previous Mishnah, that you're going to translate that, in other words, just like in the previous Mishnah, Beis Shammai had said you're going to be a Nazir because even though you're saying Nazir from Gregors and Devela, and you can't be because there's no Nazir, it's only from wine, but ain't no Demaisi Derav Latal, if you remember from the previous Daf. So when he says Hareini Nazir, you're saying it for the purposes of Yayin. When you're saying b'bsach, it's like you're coming to be shayil. However, in the Yochalav said the ain't shayil ben Nazir is according to Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel says, no, you're not a Nazir because you could be chayzer because there is shayil ben Naziris. And when you say b'bsach, there's neder pischa imay. That's how we explained for the Tanna Kama of the previous daf. Rabbi Huda had said, no, according to everyone, you're not a Nazir because when the words are not contradicting, it's coming to explain. Beis Shammai says it's going to be a neder because although you're saying Nazir, but you could say Nazir Lashon Afrasha, you're separating, so it would mean you're Nazir from the Basar Par, that's a neder. According to Beis Hillel, it wouldn't be a neder because you didn't take a Kederech HaNaidrim. So that's exactly like the previous stuff. Now, but it says the Taisvis, when there is Rame Bachama, who's translating, he's saying the case is Imamedis Me'aleha, what's the word Ani then? You see, because if you just read the Gemara without Taisus, you always say, oh, okay, that's how he explains the case of the Mishnah. Problem is that how does it really translate into the words of the Mishnah? You're making up a case that you're saying that the cow is laying down. You're saying the cow thinks it's not going to get up. I'm going to be a nazir from its meat if it gets up by itself. Where do you see that in the words of the Mishnah? So one thing we already said, that it's the guy saying it. It's not hareini nazira without a mapike. It's with a mapike. I am a nazir from its meat, because nizira mit a mapike means I'm a nazir from it, not that I am a feminine nazir. Okay, but then how do you read the last words? What's imay medis ani? You're telling me it's not the cow speaking. It's if you're speaking about the cow and you're saying if it gets up by itself, imay medis me'aleha. What do you do with the word ani? Says the Taisus, you have to push and explain that that's going on the person who's accepting the Naziris. And you have to read Imay Medes Ani, interesting, the way he says, Imay Medes Me'aleha. And Ani is Nazir Mibesara. So the Ani is not going on the cow. Imay Medes Ani. If it gets up, what? How is it getting up? By itself? Ani. Me. Me what? Me. I'm the guy who I said, I'm going to be separated from its meat. Now, when you already said that you're a Nazir with a mapig hay. So it repeats the word on the person that's accepting the Naziris. So therefore, Rabbeinu Peretz says that you're right, according to the flow of the words in the Mishnah, it does sound like the cow itself is saying, I'm going to be a Nazira. If I get up myself, that would make sense. And therefore, the Mishnah would make sense when you're saying Ani. But according to Rambam Bachama, then you didn't really have to say Ani, because you already said in the Nazira. And it's like a superfluous wording. It's just that the Mishnah is being said as if the cow is saying it. And just like you would have to explain what we just explained regarding the Mishnah regarding the cow, that's how you'd have to explain the way it's going on the door. That's one interpretation. Taisus brings from a Rabbi Yosef Ish Yerushalayim that he explains the words of the Mishnah as follows. Omar, this like the opening word of our daf was the first word of Mishnah. Omar, in other words, if the person says, when he sees the cow squatting, he says, I think that what? I think that Amr Parazu, I'm reading from the words of the Mishnah, but from Taisus, the last of the narrow lines, that the cow is saying, Hareini Nazira imay medis. I'm going to be a Nazira if I get up. Meaning that the cow wants to get up, but it can't get up. And it would willingly take a neder of Naziris if it could get up. Says the person, I will complete its words. Meaning, I'll fulfill its neder. Because I'll be a nazir from its meat if it gets up. And therefore the whole mission is going on the words of the cow. So that would make it a little bit more, it would make it easier to flow. And the Gemara is adding on and saying that the person is saying, I'm going to be a nazir if it gets up. But says Tais, it's a little bit a wonder on this opinion, because if it's talking about that the person is saying explicitly that I'm a nazir from its meat if it gets up, so then the whole idea of the cow talking is unnecessary, because it has nothing to do with the cow saying. Essentially, you're saying it's the guy saying I'm a nazir from its meat. So if you're saying that, then that's already the main thing. That's exactly what we had in the previous mission, which you want to illustrate is the same thing. I'm a nazir from Gerges and De'ela. I'm a nazir from the meat of the animal. What's halacha going to be? So what do you bring in the cow talking for? I mean, it's definitely interesting to add some flavor to the story, but it seems to be unnecessary. Says Taisa, so it seems to explain, no, the person is not saying anything. Rather, he just says over the narrative of the cow. And there's no application of Naziris. Rather, that it should be separated for an isser, that it should not have hana from its meat. So therefore, when a person is telling us this over, what the cow is saying, his intention is to fulfill on him that he should be a nazir from its meat. And that's the machlekes Beis Shammai Hillel, that as if a person explicitly said, I'm a nazir from its meat if it gets up. But then Taisa says, if that's the case, then why does the Gemara ask us shortly, right now we're going to quote the Gemara's question that says, Beis Shammai already said this once before, we said this in the previous Mishnah, what do you mean? We have to tell you that even though he didn't mention anything about Naziris, he's just telling you over what the cow said, so therefore it would seem to be necessary. Okay, that's the Gemara's question right now. But again, that was a long way of explaining this case of the Mishnah. What exactly is the case? Is it the person saying? Is the cow saying? But ultimately, just to simplify, Rama Bachama is saying the cow is squatting and saying that I think that he's saying that he thinks that the cow thinks that it cannot get up. I'm going to be a nazir from its meat if it gets up by itself. Whether because the cow really wants to get up and he's saying, I'll take its naziras that it wants to, but he didn't really say that explicitly. Look upon him. It's like you're saying, I'm a nazir from its meat. And then, there's machlekes Beis Shammai Hillel, will you be a nazir or not? Fragt die Gemara, but Beis Shammai already said this once before. We had this in our previous Mishnah. Why do you repeat it again? It says, you're right, this is what's called tarti tlas. In other words, we say this halacha in 2-3 places. We say it in our previous Mishnah about the dried figs. We say it in our Mishnah 2 more times with the cow and the door. And he says tarti tlas. Yeah, it's the same halacha 2 or 3 times. Rabbi says tarti tlas. We say it 2 or 3 times. But, says the Gemara, but you need it. Why? Why do you need it? Why do you have to say the same halacha 2 or 3 times? Says, well, I'll tell you why. Had you said it in the previous Mishnah, rather than dried in the pressed figs, that's what Beis Shammai says, that you're going to be a nazir. Why? Because it could get mixed up with grapes. They're both peiros. They're both fruits. Maybe his intention was to say grapes, and by mistake he said figs, mixed up, whatever. So it makes sense that, although you said in the Gergizim and Dvelu, you meant Minan Novim, so I can leiden that the Beis Shammai is going to say you're going to be a nazir. But to mix up meat of a cow with grapes, that's not the same thing. So maybe Beis Shammai would hold that you're not going to be a nazir. And had we said the case over here regarding the meat, that's why Beis Shammai says you're going to be a nazir, because meat and wine are the primary staples of a meal, and therefore people would confuse the two of them. So you could confuse wine and meat. So therefore, even though you say Hareini Nazir min hapara, maybe you meant to say from wine. Avol Gregor said but regarding pressed and dried figs, that's not the staples of the meal, and therefore you would not confuse it with grapes. Kamash Malan, that's why you had to tell me both of those cases. Now, Tais does ask, says, but why didn't you just disagree regarding meat and wine without anything of a cow getting up, according to the way they're explaining? Says Tais, you're right. It's just because we wanted to tell you that its intention is to get up, meaning by itself. But Tais does say that later on I'm going to explain that this is really part of the Gemara's question that it asks on the pshat of Rama Bachama. That really, come on, it's not necessary to say this whole, fantastic story about a cow talking about how it wants to get up. It's really the same thing as the previous Mishnah when you say I'm nazir from the basa of the para and saying, you're ending off like Gregor and Devela, as the Gemara seems to be saying, according to Rambam Chama, that's the same thing. We're just saying why it's a tzricha, so why it would be necessary that you wouldn't know one from the other one. And the last case, V'yet Mahani Tarti, had we said the case of the previous Mishnah of the Gregor and Devela and this Mishnah of the para, of the cow, Hani the Beis Shammai. Maybe that's where Beis Shammai says halacha. But a door is obviously not being confused with grapes and wine. Maybe they would say it agrees to Beis Hill that there's no room to make an error for Naziris, and it would not be. So therefore you have to say the door too. And because again, it's not really dependent on making a mistake. As we said, it's about She'ela ben Naziris. Vitan Adelis, had we said the case of the door, maybe only there by a door where you can't confuse at all, and that's where Beis Hill says not going to be a Nazir. Abahach Tarti, but regarding the other two cases, I would say that it agreed to Beis Shammai that it would be a Nazir. Kamash Malan Dalai. That no, Beis Hill disagrees in all 3 cases. Again, so according to the Rambam Bachama, this is exactly as we had in the previous Mishnah, and he just explains the case of how do you translate the case. It's crouching, and he says, the cow thinks it's not getting up. I'm going to be nazir from its meat if it gets up by itself. And it got up by itself. And that's Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel l'shitasan. If, okay, you said you can be nazir if he gets up, and it did get up by itself. So you fulfilled its stipulation, but essentially you're saying, Harini nazir mebisara. Is Harini nazir mebisara going to be a nazir or not? Or like a neder from its meat or not? But what seems to be a technicality, but is the question of the Gemara, Amar Rav. Rambam says to Rambam Bachama, Mi Ketani, does the Mishnah say anything about im amda me'eleha? If it gets up by itself? It doesn't say that. The words of the Mishnah were im oimedes, if it gets up. Which, most definitely, if it would have said the word me'eleha in the Mishnah, says Rava, I would agree to your interpretation. But from the fact that it doesn't say the word me'eleha, obviously, you cannot explain the way you're interpreting. Because if the interpretation was like you, the Mishnah should have said, Hareini naza mibisacha. And this is how the Taisus explained the Gemara's question, as we just alluded a moment ago, that he explains that the question that we were asking is part of Rava's question. So it's like really a layered question that he's asking. It's not just asking, does it say the word me'eleha? He's saying that, as Taisus is going to explain why that's not really such a strong question, he's saying that, yeah, but the way you're interpreting the Mishnah, essentially the Gemara should have just said, the Mishnah should have just said, Hareini nazir me'besacha. That's the machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. When you say nazir from something that's not nazirus, Gregor's develo or besara, and you shouldn't have made it dependent on standing up. In other words, what's bothering Rava is that, look, you're adding on to the words of the Mishnah me'eleha, but the truth is, he's not bothered the fact that Rambam Bachama is adding on v'amda me'eleha. That's also adding on to what the Mishnah didn't say v'amda me'eleha. He's adding on to the story, and it did get up by itself. It says, yeah, that's wording. You don't have to add on to the words of the Mishnah, because it's only what the primary condition of the vow, which is what the Tana has to tell us. What the cow did afterwards, that the Tana doesn't have to teach us. That it could be an oral understanding. What was the story after that? Because most definitely, if he made his neder dependent on the cow getting up by itself, that it's not going to be a nazir if it doesn't get up by itself. So that we didn't have to explain that it got up by itself. So that's not what's bothering Rava. That, it didn't say in the Mishnah, Amda me'eleha, then I'm okay. Obviously, if your condition was that I'm going to be nazir if it gets up by itself, it means if it gets up by itself. But moreover, it says Tais, is that you cannot explain that the condition was if it's going to get up, whether by itself or whether from other people. Why not? Because a person would never make his Tanai dependent on something which he knows is going to happen anyway. It's like, however it gets up, because if his intention is to be a Nazir, why would it make it dependent on something which is inevitable anyway? So obviously it's dependent on something, which is if it gets up by itself. Now, the question is then to ask Taisus, so what's so bothersome to Rava? Does it say in the Mishnah me'eleha? What do you mean? We have throughout Shas, all the Mishnayos, and the Gemara even says that it's so important to have Gemara, because you wouldn't know if you learn Mishnayos, we always have words missing in the Mishnah. Grace, kasha Rava, bamba, kasha Ramba Chama. You're disagreeing on this interpretation because it doesn't say in the Mishnah me'eleha. There's a word missing. So it says a very important yesod. It says, that's only where it's obvious that there's something missing. Then we, the Amayram, have the ability to add on to the words of the Mishnah. And we could say, the word's missing, and this is what it says. But according to the interpretation of Rambam Chama, nothing is evident from the Mishnah that there's missing a word me'eleha. Because the machlekes hatanoim has nothing to do with the cow getting up. And this is how Tais explains, and now it's clear the Gemara's question, because without Taisus, you read the Gemara and say, it doesn't say the word me'eleha. So it says, okay, and therefore what? Many times the word's missing. That's your grace of kasha. So Taisus, no. And this is what he was saying. This is what we were saying was really the difficulty in Rambam Chama in the whole place. What are you making this grace of tanoim, this grace of masa, this whole fantastical story with a cow laying, saying, I'll get up, I'm not going to get up, I could get up, he's not confident, he's low self-esteem, this cow, and say if it gets up by itself, you're making a whole story. It has nothing to do with that. The whole machlekes is if you take a nazir from the basar, if nazir is going to take effect or not. That's really what it is. It has nothing to do with this whole story. So that's why his question is on Rambam Chama, does it say me'aleha? In other words, what are you adding on to the words of the Mishnah when there's no evidence from the Mishnah that we should even add on any word, because it has nothing to do with this whole story anyway. What are you making a grace mass over here, which according to you has no relevance to the halachic disagreement of the Tanoim? As we'll see in a moment, that we're going to make it not exactly like the previous Mishnah. But the way Rambam Chama was, it's the same thing. You're just giving the people like telling long stories, and you could have said it in 30 seconds. By the way, this was 1878, and 1870, let me tell you what happened that year. In that year, the price of raisins were incredibly high. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Here also, the question Rava is really asking, and it's very important to understand that, not the word me'aleha, that's not what threw off Rava. Just you're adding on words because of the story that has nothing to do with the whole machlekes. You could say chesed when it has to do with it, has nothing to do with it. So that's his question. So Elam Rava gives a different interpretation than Rambam Chama. He says, there was a cow squatting in front of him. He says, carbon. This is on me as a carbon. In other words, the cow. And what he means to say is that if I'm not going to get it up, as the Gemara concludes later on, it's just that the Gemara doesn't let him finish because it asks first. But essentially what he means to say, and we're going to see this at the end, is that Beishami hold that the thrust of this guy is because he wants to get the cow up. And when it says that if it's not going to get up, as we're going to see shortly what Rav is trying to say, so he's saying that if I'm not going to get it up, and the story ends up being that he doesn't get it up, so he's going to be chayiv to bring a carbon. Now, Basil hold that if he's saying imloy omd, if it's not going to get up, he doesn't mean if I'm not going to get it up. This is the main point, which it sounds very interesting. But the machlek b'shem Basil is, when I say if it's not going to get up, do I mean I'm not going to get it up? Or do I mean, no, it's not going to get up because it's squatting. And if it gets up, okay, so it gets up, so I'm not chayiv to bring a carbon, because as long as it gets up, so then it's not laying down anymore. The guy says that if it doesn't get up, I'm going to be chayiv to bring a carbon. So that again, that depends if you're saying it's going to get up or I'm going to get it up because it got up by itself. Now, so what bothers Taisus is, but the words of the Mishnah were Harein Nazira. Where is Rava bringing in this idea about a carbon over here? He's saying that it's going to be on Harei like carbon. Where do you see carbon? So it says Taisus, what you could say is that the guy is saying, I'm going to bring a carbon of Naziris if it doesn't get up. Now, although the carbon of Naziris does not come from a behema gasa like a cow, so how can you say that you're going to bring this cow as the carbon of Naziris? He says, that's the obligatory carbonus of a Nazir. But they used to bring the dagam and the davis with their carbon of Naziris. That was their custom that they had, as we see in the Sifri. And those could come even from Bakar and Sain, according to whatever Ned and Nadavi brings. So therefore, when he says Harei like carbon, he means to say Harein Nazir of the Mishnah is a carbon of Naziris, even though it's not the carbon of Naziris, but it's carbonis that they used to bring with the Naziris. But that's what he means to say. Okay. But the Gemara says, Bishlam b'par, I could understand your case that you're trying to describe is a cow, because bas carboni, it's something that you could bring as a carbon. El del is bas carboni? But, so that's why we said that the Gemara jumps in and asks and says, wait a second, this whole interpretation won't really work. Because you're telling me, Shtikul Torah, that you're saying this cow is going to be a carbon, meaning I'm going to become a Nazir because as a Nazir, I bring carbonis, and with those carbonis, I bring a voluntary carbonis, and this cow will be one of those things. So therefore, Beishame is saying that Beisol disagrees. Okay, so Beishame says you'll be a Nazir, Beisol says you won't be a Nazir. But wait a second, that only works for one of the cases of the Mishnah. It works for the cow. For the door, how does a door? There's no like a door knocking on the wood, right? I'm saying, so it can't become a carbon. Tell him Rabbi says, okay, I'll tell you what the case is. The cow is squatting in front of him as we continue Talmud Beis. V'amar, and he says, Hareini Nazir miyayin im loy amda. So we had explained already this part, which we didn't get a chance to finish the words, but he was saying, I'm a Nazir from the wine, if im loy amda, and this is going to be very important how to translate im loy amda, which already alluded to it already from the Taisus on the Amud Aleph on the bottom. Because even though he quotes the words of Amud Beis, it's really, as the Mefarshim explained, really on the Havamina from the first part. So the guy's saying like this. When the Mishnah says Hareini Nazira, what it means to say is, I'm a Nazir from wine because of the cow. That's what he means. When he's saying Hareini Nazira, I'm a Nazir because of the cow. If it doesn't get up. And what happened was v'amda me'eleha, and it got up by itself. So as Taisus points out, this is not adding on to the words of the Mishnah, as the problem Rabbi had with Rambam Chama was adding on the word me'eleha. Here, the only thing he's adding on is the word loy. Because actually the words of the Mishnah were im, if you recall from the words of the Mishnah were im oimedes. Here he's saying im loy amda, if it doesn't get up. But it's just saying the story that that's actually what happened, that it did get up by itself. Okay, so what's the machlekes? So Bishami Sarvi, Bishami hold Turfe the High Gavra. What's Turfe? Turfe means the revelation of his intent. In other words, Bishami hold, when the person says such words, his intention is to say that everyone thinks that the cow that's squatting so forcefully that nobody could get this cow to get up, I'm going to be a Nazir. In other words, even though I don't want to be a Nazir because it's a big pain in the neck for me, but I'm going to be a Nazir if I don't get this cow up. But what's the primary intent? Because of I'm going to get it up. In other words, if I don't have the ability to get it up, then that's his intent. Imloy Amda doesn't mean if it's not going to get up. I'm a Nazir if I don't get it up. Oh, what was the story? At the end, what happened is that he didn't get it up. It got up by itself. So therefore, Nazir is going to take effect. Midin the halachas of Nazir. Besil on the other hand, they hold, as the Bach adds on the words, that Turfi the Hagava, what's the primary intent of this guy? Because it's laying down, it's squatting. Because it's forcibly just laying there. So in other words, I'm going to be a Nazir if it doesn't get up. V'hokamas. And it got up. So if it got up, so therefore, I'm not going to be a Nazir. That's how Rav explains Machlekes B'Sham Beisil. Now, Frank Taisus says, what do you mean? You should have the same question. Does it say anywhere in the Mishnah, Im loy amda, if it doesn't get up? Says Taisus, no, that's not difficult. Because many Mishnayos have errors, and we say Chesura Mechsera. Because Rav is different than Rami Bachama. Because Rav is saying that is the foundation of the machlekes of the Tanoim regarding it getting up. It's so important because without Taisa you wouldn't understand how is Rav any better than Rami Bachama. You're also adding on the word loy. If anything, loy is like switching the case from getting up to not getting up. You're adding on a word that switches the whole idea. But that's not difficult. We always say that. But you, Rambam Bachama, that's why it's so important with Taisa, say, but what does Meila add to the Machlekes Tanoim? You were saying it's the same as the previous Mishnah Daf Tes. According to Rav, it has nothing to do with Mishnah Daf Tes. It has to do with when you're saying such a condition that if it doesn't get up, I'm going to be a Nazir. What did he mean? Did he mean, well, I'm not, if I don't get it up? Or if it just doesn't get up? Now, he says you cannot explain the Machlekes of the Tanoim regarding the getting up the cow if you wouldn't add on the words loy in the gears of the Mishnah. So therefore, it's obvious that it's missing the word loy over here because you cannot explain the machlekes in any other way. But according to the explanation of Rabbi Chama, it's not dependent on the machlekes at all on the getting up. Again, it's just like taking a neder from Basar. If the neder Nazir would take effect or not. So according to him, it was very difficult. Does it say me'aleha? Because it's not evident for the machlekes tanoim that it's missing the word me'aleha. So therefore, you have no right to add on to the words of the Mishnah. That was Rabbi's question, Rabbi Chama. But then says Taisvis that why doesn't the Gemara ask that why do you need a squatting cow? According to this Tana, if it gets up by itself, why don't you just disagree regarding if you take a neder of Nazir from the Basar, if it's going to take effect, the Naziras, and then you'll have Beishamai and Basil going according to their opinions. Says Taisus that you're right, that's really what Rava was asking. Again, he's just clarifying what we had already explained to Amid Aleph, that why is Rava asking on Rama Bachama the word Me'aleha? Why doesn't he ask, why do you need the whole spiel? Why do you need a whole story, this whole fantastical story about a cow and his thinking and there's a beanstalk and whatever? And what do you need the story for? So says Taisus, no, that's exactly what he was asking. When he asked him, does it say the word Me'aleha? The whole thing was just to process the whole thing and say that since the Machlekes Tanoim has nothing to do with the cow getting up, so you have no right to add on to the words in the Mishnah the word Me'aleha. Now, since the Machlekes Tanoim is not about the cow getting up, so then it's even more difficult. Why does the Mishnah have to mention anything about a cow getting up? Just make it Machlekes regarding if you take a neder from Basar and then they should go l'shitasam. And you're right. The whole point of the asking the word Me'aleha was only to remind him that the Machlekes Tanoim has nothing to do with that getting up of the cow. And now I have a bigger question: is that just say about the meat, and that's it. Just say l'shitasam. So that really was the fundamental question that Rava was asking on Rama Bacham. But that question, again, would not be difficult on Rava, even though he also has a word missing, but that's because that's the critical understanding of the case of the Mishnah. But as the Gemara, if that's the case, that the interpretation of the Mishnah is like Rava, Ema Seifa. Now, the Mishnah, if you recall, had a Machlekes Tanoim in the Machlekes Tanoim. When a Machlekes B'Sham B'Sil B'Gemi and Nazir or not, that's how the Tanna Kama says it. But Rabbi Huda, as he said in the previous Mishnah, says no, Machlekes if it's going to be a neder from the meat or not. So says the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, even Rabbi Shloimy says that you're going to be obligated. It's only when the guy says, Hare, and the gear says, Parazu like carbon, this cow's going to be on me as a carbon. The question is, Para mikamatves bamidi? In other words, why is Rabbi Yehuda disagreeing on the Tanna Kama? That the cow is only going to be like a carbon, but he didn't say any of his words like the wording of kainim, to say that this cow is like a kainim or like a carbon. You're saying that the case in which the words on the top of this amid, you said the guy says, I'm a nazir from wine if it doesn't get up. So if that's the words that he used, so how could you just say that the cow is going to be a neder, like a carbon, if you didn't say that? You translated the case where the guy says, nazir miyayin layamda. So you took a nazir from wine if it doesn't get up. So how, according to Rabbi Yehuda, are you going to explain that Beishamai holds that you're going to be chayiv is going to be a neder of its meat? If you didn't say that, you said I'm a nazir from wine if the cow doesn't get up. It's just like a taliyah in your neder of naziris. So rather says the Gemara, okay, similar to what I said before, but just to answer the question that you asked, I'm going to rephrase the case. Going to Amma says Rav, it's where, for example, where he says, Hareini nazir mebesara, not from wine, I'm a nazir from its meat, im loy amda, if the cow doesn't get up. And guess what happened? Va'amda me'eleha, but it got on its own. Again, that's not the problematic me'eleha. That's like the end of the story, like Tesa explained that. I don't have to even mention in the Mishnah, because obviously if you're making depend on something, it's what happens. Okay, again, Beishamai held, this is a little redundant, but Turfi the Hagavra, what was the main intent of that person? I'm going to show this cow, if it doesn't get up, I'm going to ox there. And you didn't get it up. It got up by itself. Okay, guess what? You're a nazir. You said if you don't get it up, you'll be a nazir. You didn't get it up. Again, it sounds very simplistic, but that's their machlekes. Basil holds, no, Turfi the Hagavra, what was the main intent of this person? It's squatting. I just want it up. It got up. So then I'm not a nazir. Now, the Gemara says, Ubisil Savri, does Basil really hold that Eloi Kamas? I mean, you're telling me that the reason why, according to Basil, you're not going to be a nazir is because your main intent is, I just want it up. I don't have to be a showman and show like I can get it up. Whatever, I'll still wear my cowboy hat even if I don't get it up. It's not any zilzal in my covet. But you tell me Eloi Kamas sounds like, but if it wouldn't get up, have a nazir, then he would be a nazir? But Va'amri, but Basil hold mibesachal have a nazir, because that's the same thing as the previous Mishnah when you say a nazir from Gregorius, which was also not a nazir. So even if it does not get up, why would you be a Nazir if you said mibisara? Says the Gemara, no, you're right. Beis Hillel wouldn't hold that. L'tamai de Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel in our Mishnah was just going according to Beis Shammai. In other words, Beis Hillel was telling Beis Shammai, Lidi down according to us, the school of Hill. You're right. Afil loy kamas, even if it doesn't get up, Namir lehav a Nazir, it's not going to be a Nazir because they're disagreeing on both points. That not only when it gets up, but even if it didn't get up, because you cannot be a Nazir from Basar. You didn't take it kederech hanoidrim. But according to you, Damri to have a Nazir, you say that he would become a Nazir if it doesn't get up. Oidlan mias, but at least agree to us. The turfer that didn't gather that really the main intent of this person was mishum deravi because it's squatting. Well, kamas and they got up, and therefore he should not be in Nazir because Amaisa got up. Beis Shammai, they would tell you no, lav, no. Turfer that gather the main intent of this person is mishum ukba biyadahu. He's going to show this cow that I'm going to get you up. And he didn't get the cow up, and therefore you're going to be a Nazir because you didn't get it up. And you said, if I don't get it up, again, the words were lo'am. The question is, did it mean it's going to get up, it's not going to get up, or if I'm not going to get it up? And that's the Machlik B'Shem Yisrael. Now, this big last taisis here on the first of the widest lines, he says, okay, now the disagreement is in the words, as we explained before. And they're also disagreeing when you're taking a neder from the basar, if it's going to be a nazir for all things, meaning for all what's included in that, or not. Says Taisis, now since Rav is explaining the machlekes regarding the cow getting up, if you recall, that was what his main question was in Rabbah Bachamba, vos hatis mit the ganze masa. According to Rabbah, the whole masa is very important. It's all about getting the cow up, not just the cow is saying whatever, that'll be nazir from its meat. Okay, so the question is, why did he have to edit and add on the words loy on the words of the Mishnah? You could have explained without this editing on additions, glosses to the words of the Mishnah. You could have said that the guy says like this: I'm a nazir from its meat if it gets up, and he got it up. Beis Shammai would sound like, great. Im amda means if I'm going to get it up, and he got it up, because he put in the effort to get it up, so therefore you're going to be a nazir from its meat. Now, since the nazir takes effect on the meat, it's going to be for everything, even on wine, because as we explained this already in the previous daf, that he holds that it's like trying to be shoyal on it, but the words harini nazir would be on wine, because Beis Shammai l'shitasin. Beis Hillel would hold, if it gets up, meaning the words im amda would mean by itself. If he gets it up, and it didn't get up by itself, and the Nazir does not take effect then even from its meat, because it didn't get up by itself. So why couldn't you just say very simply, without adding on the words loy, to explain the case of the Mishnah about it getting up, to refer to this machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? Says Taisus, yes. The only problem is that actually Beis Hillel would not disagree in that case that not to be a nazir. That since he says it's going to be a nazir im amda, so that would sound like in all situations, the Taisus is differentiating in what your wording would be, what the translation would be. If it was like the words of our Mishnah, im medis ani, if you just said simply that case, because that would be the easiest translation, right? Rav is adding the word im loy amda. If it doesn't get up, then I'm going to be a nazir. I'm going to show, and then the machlekes B'Shem Yisrael, am I going to show it, or it's going to get up? In fact, Taisus is saying, why do you have to do this for? If that on words, just say im amda. If it gets up, question is, what does im amda mean? Does it mean I'm going to get it up, or it's going to get up? You could have said it the same thing without adding words. So it says no. If he would have said im amda, that would have sounded like no matter how it gets up, whether through him or through others, meaning by itself or by someone else. That's what Taisus says the word im amda would mean in all. Or additionally, says Taisus, that it's not the way of a person making a neder to say such a wording, that according to Beis Shammai, that he's being toiles naziris if it's going to get up, meaning if I'm going to get it up, then I'm going to put in the effort to get it to stand up so that naziris takes effect, because since he's basically saying that he wants to be a nazir, if I'm going to get it up, I'm going to be a nazir, meaning you want to be a nazir. I mean, the way of saying I don't really want to be a nazir. I'm saying, but if I don't get it up, then I'll be a nazir. This way would say, I want to be. If I get it up, I'll be a nazir. Says Taisus, human psychology, you would just say Hareini Nazir. Why would you make your neder dependent on something about getting the cow up? But the wording that Rava does say, that's a very common way that a person takes a neder. I'll be a nazir if I don't finish this by tonight. Well, then I'll donate to the shul $5,000, whatever. You basically say I don't want it, so that makes sense. So it means if I don't get it up, in other words, that even though I don't really want to be a nazir, I'm accepting by myself naziris if I don't have the ability, if I don't have the strength to follow through on what I'm promising. So if I don't have, but if I do have koyach to get it up, then I won't be a nazir because I don't want to be a nazir. So that's why, it's very interesting how Toys says, that's why he had to add in the words loy to explain that that's how people usually take a neder. But to say, if I get it up, people wouldn't say that. So therefore he doesn't want to lie that. He'd rather add on the word loy into the Mishnah to say that type of case, because that's not how people will usually say it. Then Toys asks a question, he says,
it's a person who's, let's say, a gambler, so he does those kind of things. He challenges himself. So I think it depends on the nature of the person, what he's trying to do over here.
Right. The only thing is, if he wants to be a nazir, he says, "I'll be a nazir if I get." I hear you saying that. Okay, it could be maybe those are the people. It says that's yeah, right, exactly. But it sounds like that's not the normal way of talking. So it sounds like Rav would rather say the way people most people would say that if I don't do this, then I'll become a nazir. I'm saying but that's how people say. And versus they don't say, I'll be a nazir if I get it up. But you want to be a nazir, it sounds like. So then forget it. Why are you saying if I get it up? You just say I'll be a nazir. Yeah, maybe some people will do that, but it sounds like most people will not do that. But then Taisa says, why did the Gemara have to say that, a tzrichasa? We had asked when Rami Bar Chama had said, in the interpretation of our Mishnah, that was the first interpretation of Amin Aleph, said, wait a second, it's the same thing as taking a nazir from meat, it's the same thing as taking a nazir from Gregos and Zvela, the same thing as door. Why do you need all these cases? So the Gemara showed, there's a tzrichasa. Each one is saying something you wouldn't have known from the other. But, fragt Taisus, what do you mean? It's a whole new machlekes over here, that regarding, when you say if it's not going to get up, and it gets up by itself, where that itself we don't know from the other case of the previous Mishnah. So there's the Marav Ranchberg says that there's a few lines over here that's a Haggah, but he says that some want to say that maybe all the terutzim that the Gemara had answered in the name of Rava, really Rava never answered. And Hitaka doesn't hold of this Trey Atlas. And really Rava only answered the last answer, which is the final answer we have from Rava of be nazir from its basar if it doesn't get up. But all the prior terutzim, Rava didn't really answer. Rather, it's because the Gemara had asked on Rami Bar Chama, and Rava had asked Rami Bar Chama, so it mentions like all of them as if it's in the name of Rava. Because he says you find this as you find in Yavamas, Daf Lamed Hey. But then the question is, in the wording of the Gemara that says Bishame hold, the tur for the Agava, what's the main intent of this person? That's the question, says Taisus, that you don't know from the machlekes regarding Gregris. So why is the Gemara asking as if like, we already know this from the previous Mishnah? Says Taisus that obviously that their machlekes is also by when you're taking a neder from the basar, which is really the machlekes in the previous Mishnah. Because if not, then they should have disagreed explicitly from wine regarding the cow getting up. Now, from Rabbi Yehuda, you see that you didn't take a neder from wine as the machlekes, because then Rabbi Yehuda would never have disagreed. Obviously, you wouldn't be a neder from the meat if you took a nazar from the wine. Obviously, that you took a neder from its meat, and they're going l'shitasam. That's why the Gemara had to say a tzrichasa, to say that, so that's the same thing as the previous Mishnah. But, says Taisus, they're also disagreeing regarding the standing up of the cow. Because if that would be the case, then you should have just explicitly said the machlekes is only regarding when you take a nazar from the meat. Why do you have to mention the cow getting up? Obviously, that the machlekes is also regarding the standing up of the cow. So it's really a double machlekes that they're having regarding when you take a nazar from meat, which is the same as the previous Mishnah. But at the same time, and that's why the Gemara is asking, why do I need tartit las? And at the same time, it's also machlekes regarding the standing of the cow, because if not, what are you bringing in that whole story for? And then says Taisa begin to say, what's pushing them to say that Beis Hillel holds that the main intent of this guy is if it's going to get up or not if I'm going to get up. And you have to say that Beis Hillel was going according to the interpretation of Beis Shammai. Why don't you just say very simply, Beis Hillel holds he's not going to be a Nazir, just like he says when you take a Nazir from Gregris and when you take a Nazir from Basar. So what you could say is that obviously Beis Hillel is coming to disagree not only on when you take a Nazir from Basar, and again, this is really the main thrust of this thesis, that there's two elements that are happening in our sugya. There's the Nazir from Basar, which is like the previous Mishnah, and then there's another element regarding the standing up of the cow, which is this whole case that we have in our Mishnah. Meaning, obviously, Beis Hillel is coming to disagree also regarding the getting up of the cow. Because if he was only disagreeing regarding when you take a Nazir from Basar, like their opinion of the previous daf, so then we should have just made the disagreement just like from the meat. And why you mentioned this whole story. And you can't say that the reason why we said this whole thing about the cow getting up was only to tell you the reason of Beis Shammai, that it's like a Nazir from the meat when he makes it neder depend on the standing of the cow. And we're only telling you that the reason of Beis Shammai, which he's saying that, if it doesn't get up, means if I'm not going to get it up. No, the text doesn't explain why, but he says, obviously it's not only for Beis Shammai, it's also for Beis Hillel. Obviously he's coming to tell us also the pshat in Beis Hillel, that when you make your neder dependent on the getting up the cow, that it's not going to take effect even on the basar, because it doesn't mean you getting it up. It means it's going to get up. So it's a double machlekes, according to what Tais is saying. One final question, Tais says, at the end of the day, what's the nafkamin according to Beis Hillel? But even if this guy takes a nazir from the basar, it's not going to take effect in all halachas of naziris, like we know from Gregris. In other words, like the Maran Baranshberg explains, he says that whether you take a naziris from wine, whether you take a neder from basar, it's just like he holds by Gregris. So what's the nafkamina regarding this machlekes, regarding the standing up of the cow? So what you could say is the nafkamina is where you take a neder from yain explicitly, and you tell you a neder about the getting of the cow, that according to Beis Hillel, the naziris will not take effect, because according to Beis Hillel, it's because it's squatting, and not that I'm going to get up, that it's going to get up. So again, what comes out from Taisus is that there's two machlekes really happening over here, according to Rav's interpretation of the Mishnah. One is the same machlekes as the previous Mishnah of the Gregris, when you take a nazir from Basar. Another machlekes is when you say imloy amda, what do you mean? I'm not going to get up, or it's not going to get up? And Taisus shows how, it would have enough kamina either way, but it's obvious that they're disagreeing on both points, and that's why the Mishnah says the case of the cow getting up. And that's really what the machlekes in the Gemara was about, trying to figure out what exactly is the case. The machlekes Rav Muhammad and Rava. And there's also the same thing as the same idea of the previous daf of taking a nazir from basar if it takes effect or not. Thank you to any time for hosting us.